that, to be very blunt, at times it's almost a bore. It isn't a thrill to say, God, that's mixed well, because drum sounds are great. All the bands have good drum sound now.
Right.
It's not just, you know, certain recording artists.
That's right.
Where is the craftsmanship of the technical end of it, the engineering side, and the musician side heading? Because you're at the forefront of that. I mean, obviously your record sounds just brilliant.
Thank you. Well, I think there's two ways to answer that question. Hopefully, now that the records can technically be so perfect, the producers and the record companies will allow the creative freedom to spark what you're hearing. Before, the music was raw, the energy was there, you could tell that the players were into something. Didn't matter if it sounded technically correct. Now everything's getting technical. The players are trying to play perfect every time. The engineer wants the best snare sound he can possibly get.
I'm a drummer.
See, I think all that's fine, but let's get back to the feel. What are we trying to say with this record? The kids on the street, I don't think, care if the drums sound great or not.
Right.
And I always use myself as an example. The first album I did for Warner Brothers in 1978 was the second album I had ever engineered in my life. The record does not sound good. Has no apparent level, it's not punchy, but you can hear everything that's going on, but it's not a well-recorded record. It was a very successful album for me. The people that listen to that listen to the music, not the sound.
Yeah. So, in other words, you're saying it's sort of moving in a cycle as far as the musicians go. Naturally, the technology isn't going to move back.
Sure.
But if I can just interject a little something in here, we've noticed in the British New Wave, which is sort of the latest stage of this New Wave movement, as it were, the New Wave
New rock.
New rock, is it technically sounds excellent. The records sound great, as opposed to the early punk, which was, you know,
A garage band
right,
concept.
exactly.
Yeah.
So they've sort of got, in some cases, the energy, but they've also got the electronics. They've got the brains behind the board and just the fun in the studio.
I'm hoping the same thing will carry into pop music and instrumental music like I play. Can sound technically perfect, but let's show our feelings through that disc.
Speaking of the feelings, again, in reference to your specific style of playing, a lot of names are used, fusion, et cetera, et cetera. It has incredible mass acceptance now, and it was a genre of music that was pretty well put together maybe in the late 60s, early 70s with Miles Davis and people like that. The critics to this day still, they tend to look down at it. They tend to call it diluted jazz. Jazz purists, fans themselves, say the improvisation is out of it, so you can't call it jazz. We were kidding earlier about jazz, J-A-Z-Z-Z-Z.
That's right.
Does that offend you? Does it seem to bother you? And why do you think that it has this mass acceptance now with the general populace?
Well, the first part of your question, it doesn't bother me at all. And don't forget the second half of your question, but I'll give you a little example.
Okay.
I like the Sleepwalk album. I don't like the last album I did, in retrospect. I don't enjoy listening to it. I don't like what I said musically. I was experimenting. Again, the freedom I have with Warner Brothers to do so. So I confess to that. I like the Sleepwalk album, and the mass of the people like my Sleepwalk album. It was reviewed in the calendar section in Los Angeles. Yeah. The guy said it's going to cause narcolepsy. Appropriately titled Sleepwalk, this album would only sound good at 78 RPMs. You know what I mean?
The guy was a punk fan,
He obviously...
Robert Hilburn recorded?
No, in fact, I don't remember the gentleman's name, and it doesn't matter, but it didn't offend me.
Feather should whatever,
you know,
that's
but
not
something like that.
You can't please all the people all the time, and that old saying, so what I do is please myself. I make product that I like.
And you please all your fans.
And so far the fans have been very pleased. You know, they know that the next record could very possibly be different than the Sleepwalk album, because I'm going for the music. I want to express the way I feel inside. So that's the first part. Now the second part of your question was
basically the critics and things with calling it diluted jazz, and jazz purists saying that if you're going to use the term jazz to describe even a portion of your music, that it should involve quite a bit of improvisation, which is what jazz is supposed to be in a way. Would you ever consider doing that? Would you ever consider doing a real jazz album in the purest sense?
Yes and no. jazz, the way we're speaking of it right now, they're talking about the 50s, not the 70s to me.
Okay.
I mean,
Oh, so you're saying that jazz is evolving?
yes, I'm not even sure
in that sense.
the title jazz is appropriate any longer. We're
They
hanging
call it
on to it,
Jazz fusion, rock
Sure.
fusion, you know.
but as soon as you add another word to it, jazz fusion, jazz rock, then I don't think it should be categorized in the same, way that you would categorize jazz.
What part of your music would you consider jazz? I mean, if you had to
I
break
know,
it down, you
I
know how
know.
all the critics do that.
Sure.
They'll listen to it and they says, well, this is a little bit of R&B here,
Right.
and here you have a little bit of rock, you have a little bit of a rock sound. And they go, where's the jazz?
Yeah.
I don't hear big band.
Right.
Whatever happened to Count Basie?
I don't-
Trumpets either.
Where are the trumpets?
I don't hear 9 choruses
I
in
mean,
a row.
I think the thing that they seem to not think about is that jazz itself isn't a specific thing. There's
No.
big band, there's cool, there's
Sure.
bebop. I mean, jazz itself has kind of arched its way out into different areas and things. It really isn't fair specifically, but
Yeah.
the criticism
I know.
still comes in
For
there.
my music, I think the jazz element in my music is the harmonic substance of it. Because the rock and roll players are improvising, and some of them are playing 8 and 9 choruses in concert.
That's right.
So is that jazz? No, it's not jazz because it's the format they're playing on. So I think it's the harmonic sound that I get. The kind of chords that I'm playing on or that I've chosen to write my melodies on are closer related because it's more sophisticated, closer to a jazz-oriented piece of music.
I think the lesson is that you record music that sounds good, and it's just not really fair to you or really to any artist to try to put a label, to try to describe it in a categorized kind of a pigeonhole.
Just good
Right.
music that people
Right.
like to listen to,
Right.
or you call it instrumental music.
Yeah.
In that sense. Speaking of your success specifically with this album and in the past, something that's always amazed me is how certain artists have attained a mass audience acceptance in Japan, and you seem to be one of those artists. You've had several gold albums. There seems to be a mystique about certain American and European artists. Is there any way, besides the fact they obviously love your music, why Japan? What's the deal? I mean, you know?
This is part speculation on my part, but the Japanese culture has proven over many years, in general, to be followers. Give them an idea, they make it better.
Right.
Okay? So when someone like myself plays on those hundreds of records every year, they follow that. I think the Japanese people, I don't know why, but they tuned into the back of album covers 5 or 6 years before the American people started doing that.
Read the liner notes.
They read the liner notes.
They
and
studied it.
They studied it, listened to it. Okay, Larry Carlton, I see his name all the time on these albums. He must be good. I think there's an assumption there. Not that every artist they see, they assume that, but they're followers. So the more exposure you have, they tune into what you're doing, and then they become fans. And it's been said because a group called the Ventures
They're
from the
biggest.
60s. How many years now? 25 years?
No one
I
even knows
believe.
they exist still here. They
That's
tour there
right.
every year, don't they?
Yeah.
So what I'm
Yeah.
getting at is they're a very loyal audience. Once they've become a fan of yours, they're very loyal. You're not going to lose that
It
audience.
seems that they're not as fad-oriented per se than they are here.
Right.
Here it's such a. I mean, if you look at let's say the British charts compared to the American charts, I mean, it's just amazing the way it changes and everything. But
Yeah.
you'll gain an acceptance here, and it'll probably last quite a bit of time. But for some reason, the Japanese just really
Right.
have you toured there quite a bit?
I go once a year.
And I'm sure it's always mass hysteria, and they
It's
sell
great.
out and everything.
I go over there and it's jump in the limousine after a concert so they don't take my silk shirt. And, you know what I'm saying? It's
Yeah.
a lot of fun. We sell a lot of records. They love our music. We do exactly like we do in the studio. We just go in and play, and they're fans. And that's a lot of fun. And they really know how to treat artists well, too. They make you feel very welcome while you're there. So I thank all of my Japanese fans, and I'm going to continue to do that.
A little
Right.
bows and.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
I wanted to ask you a question
That's what we're here for.
that only you, that you are one of the few people who